Hello, Gospel Life Church, and welcome to today's devotional. So I'm going to read a passage from Acts chapter 2, starting in verse 41, going through the end of the chapter, verse 47. Acts 2, 41 through 47. So those who received his word were baptized, and there were added that day about 3,000 souls. And they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship, to the breaking of bread and the prayers. And awe came upon every soul. Many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. And all who believed were together and had all things in common. They were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all, as any had need. And day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all the people. And the Lord added to their number day by day those who were being saved. So some of you know that we've been studying through the book of Acts. We've gone through the complete book of Acts with the teenagers and youth group, and we're almost complete. We took a little break, and we have one last lesson that we need to get done to complete the book of Acts. One of the things that was really a great thing for me in the study and was a great reminder of just the early church's sense of community and unity. And there's other places in the book of Acts where it talks about this, or you can see this, but I thought this passage was just a great summary of what you saw in the early church. And the community and unity that you see here is all because of the gospel. We see in other parts of Acts just the diversity of some of the early church, whether it's people from different backgrounds or social standing, levels of wealth. You have the Jew and the Greek that come together as part of the early church, something that would have been appalling to the Jews or unheard of at that time. And one thing that I think is notable when you think about the early church and these believers, that really they only had the gospel at this point. They just had this basic core theology of our faith. For example, there wouldn't have been any theology of end times or eschatology, no book of Revelations yet. Paul's writings weren't until AD 50 and 60. So those letters were not available to the earliest church. And it's interesting because we often lose sight of that core gospel. We get divisive because we get caught up in theological areas that are not core theology. But it's the gospel that unifies us and brings us together. There are also not any elaborate church programs in the early church or buildings even. And all these things that we think of that are a necessity for community or unity. They just had the gospel and the Holy Spirit. So let's look a little bit further at this passage and what we might be able to pull from it today. So I think in these verses we have some opportunity to compare ourselves as individuals and as a church to these early believers. And I think there's a few ways we can do this based off the passage. First, the early church is growing by leaps and bounds. And that was because the gospel was going out. Our church is growing, which is really exciting, but the vast majority of that growth is not from adding new converts. It's people that have been in churches, people that are believers and coming to our church. I really think that our going pillar is our weakest pillar. And you might say, well, wait a minute, we've always generously supported missionaries, but I don't think we're very good at spreading the good news here at home, at least not corporately and maybe even not individually for some of us. And I would say myself included in that. The second thing is that the church is said to have devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship. So we're very blessed as a church to have great preaching and teaching. I think you all know that and appreciate that. We've got many godly men who are apt to teach. The question for us is if we are as individuals devoted to the word. Are we quick to sit under this teaching, to take advantage of the opportunities that we offer as a church. We're really missing out if our spiritual life consists of just an hour on Sunday morning. We have great opportunities as well to be involved with the body in fellowship, whether that's through small group studies, men's or women's ministries, praying together, or developing personal relationships within the body. We should be strengthened by the body, built up by the body. Remember, these early believers had turned from their old ways, whether it was perhaps being caught up in the legalistic side that was very common in the Jewish religion during that time, or Gentile paganism. And they were all facing persecution at this time. All they had was each other. The last thing here is the church took care of each other, and they were generous in their giving. They were even selling their possessions and their belongings and distributing the money to anybody that had need. The question really for us is, are we taking care of each other? Where are their needs? Where can we be giving of our time or our resources? You don't need to have a lot of money or a lot of things or even a lot of time to be generous. If you think about some of the most generous people that you know, sometimes they are not the wealthiest, or sometimes they're the busiest as well. So I just pray that you would reflect on this passage, reflect a little bit on our church, reflect on yourself as an individual within the body. And I pray that you would be encouraged and challenged this morning. And I hope to see you all soon. Thanks.